Think about this for a moment. You are standing on a vessel carrying over 100,000 tons of crude oil. The nearest coastline is 400 kilometers away. The nearest port is further still. And somewhere below you, in the engine room or in the cargo pump room, something has ignited. There is no fire station you can call. There is no road for a truck to reach you. There is no building you can simply walk out of. You are on a steel platform surrounded by ocean, loaded with one of the most flammable substances on Earth, and the fire is already spreading. This is not a hypothetical scenario. It has happened multiple times. And the way a tanker responds to fire, the systems, the sequence, the decisions, is one of the most precisely engineered emergency protocols in the entire history of industrial design. Most people have no idea it exists. Let's start with what makes a tanker fire fundamentally different from any other kind of fire you might know. A tanker is not just a ship. It is a floating storage system for hydrocarbons. Crude oil, refined petroleum, liquefied natural gas, chemical condensates. These are substances with flash points ranging from below -40 degrees Celsius to around 60 degrees Celsius. Some of them ignite at temperatures that normal ambient air can easily reach on a warm day. The Sanchi was a Suezmax crude oil tanker, 274 meters long, 50 meters wide. On January 6, 2018, it was carrying 136,000 tons of natural gas condensate across the East China Sea when it collided with a bulk carrier. The condensate, an ultralight, highly volatile form of crude oil, immediately ignited. The fire burned for 8 consecutive days. Several explosions occurred. All 32 crew members died. The vessel eventually sank, creating an oil slick covering approximately 100 square kilometers of ocean. What the Sanchi case demonstrates is the extreme end of the spectrum. But it also reveals something important. When a tanker fire escapes initial containment, the consequences escalate in a way that very few other industrial emergencies can match. So the entire engineering philosophy of a tanker is built around one principle. Prevention first, containment second, suppression third. Most people, when they imagine fire suppression on a ship, think of water, sprinkler systems, fire hoses. The same technology used in buildings, just installed on a vessel. That assumption is wrong, and dangerously so. Water is largely ineffective against hydrocarbon fires. Crude oil and refined petroleum float on water. Applying water to a burning oil surface does not extinguish it, it spreads it. In some cases, it can cause a phenomenon called a boil-over, where water trapped beneath the burning oil layer rapidly converts to steam, violently ejecting burning oil in every direction. Water does have a role in tanker firefighting, primarily for boundary cooling, preventing heat from transferring through steel bulkheads into adjacent spaces. But water alone cannot fight a cargo fire on a tanker. The primary suppression agents are fundamentally different. The first line of defense on a tanker is not reactive. It is preventive, and it works before any fire has even started. It is called the Inert Gas System, or IGS. Here is the engineering logic. A fire requires 3 things: fuel, heat, and oxygen. Remove any one of them and the fire cannot exist. On a tanker, the fuel, the cargo, cannot be removed. The heat from cargo operations and ambient conditions cannot always be controlled, but the oxygen inside the cargo tanks can be controlled precisely. The inert gas system continuously pumps non-combustible gas into the ullage space, the empty space above the liquid cargo inside each tank. The source of this inert gas is typically the exhaust from the ship's own boilers, scrubbed and cooled, or in more modern vessels, a dedicated inert gas generator. The gas is primarily nitrogen and carbon dioxide, with an oxygen content kept below 8% by volume. Combustion of hydrocarbons requires an oxygen concentration of approximately 11% or higher. By maintaining an oxygen-deficient atmosphere inside every cargo tank at all times, the IGS makes ignition inside those tanks physically impossible under normal conditions. The vapor space above the oil, which would otherwise be a highly explosive mixture of hydrocarbon vapors and air, is instead an inert, non-combustible blanket. This system operates continuously. It adjusts automatically as cargo is loaded, discharged, or as the ship moves through temperature changes that cause the cargo to expand and contract. Pressure sensors, oxygen analyzers, and automatic valves maintain the inert atmosphere within precise parameters around the clock. Every tanker over 20,000 deadweight tons is required by international regulation to carry an inert gas system. It is not optional equipment. It is the primary reason that cargo tank explosions, which once caused catastrophic losses in the early history of tanker shipping, became far less common after the system became mandatory in the 1970s. But the IGS protects the cargo tanks. It does not protect the engine room, the pump room, or the accommodation spaces. And fires in these areas are the most common source of tanker emergencies. For these enclosed spaces, the primary suppression system is the fixed CO2 flooding system. The principle is the same as the IGS, but applied as an emergency response rather than continuous prevention. A dedicated room on board contains rows of high-pressure steel cylinders filled with liquid carbon dioxide. The number of cylinders is calculated based on the volume of each protected space, typically enough CO2 to flood the engine room to a concentration of at least 35% by volume within 2 minutes of activation. At 35% concentration, oxygen is displaced to a level where sustained combustion cannot occur. The fire is starved of the oxidizer it needs to continue. The activation sequence is strictly procedural. Before any CO2 is released, the space must be evacuated and sealed. All ventilation fans are stopped. All air inlets and dampers are closed. Fuel supply to running machinery is cut. Only after the chief engineer and master confirm that no personnel remain inside the space and that the space is fully sealed is the system activated. The reason for this sequence is straightforward. CO2 in concentration sufficient to extinguish a fire will also asphyxiate a human being within minutes. A release into an occupied space is immediately fatal. The system is therefore designed with deliberate time delays and mandatory alarm sequences, not to slow down the response, but to ensure the space is clear before the gas is released. When activation occurs, a pilot cylinder releases a small charge of CO2 that travels through a dedicated line and mechanically opens the main bank of cylinders in sequence. The chain reaction floods the entire cylinder bank within seconds, and the CO2 reaches the protected space through pre-installed piping and nozzles. The entire discharge typically completes within 2 minutes. After release, the space remains sealed until the vessel reaches port and a proper re-entry procedure is followed, including atmosphere testing to confirm oxygen levels have returned to safe limits before any personnel enter. For the exterior of the cargo deck, the exposed pipework, manifolds, and tank hatches, tankers carry a separate system, the foam firefighting system. Foam works differently from CO2. Rather than displacing oxygen, foam creates a physical barrier, a blanket of bubbles that covers the burning surface of the liquid, cutting off its contact with air and simultaneously cooling the surface below its ignition temperature. The foam used on tankers is AFFF, aqueous film forming foam. It is specifically formulated for hydrocarbon fires. When applied to a burning oil surface, it spreads rapidly and self-seals any gaps, forming a coherent film that suppresses both the fire and the vapor generation that would allow reignition. The foam system on a tanker is supplied through a network of fixed monitors, large nozzles mounted at fixed positions on the deck, and through hose connections that allow crew to apply foam manually. The monitors can be remotely operated from the bridge or from a safe position away from the fire, which is critical in a situation where the fire zone itself may not be accessible. Now let's address the real-world physics of why tanker fires are so difficult to control once they reach a certain scale. Hydrocarbons burn at temperatures that typically range from 800 to 2200 degrees Celsius at the flame surface. Steel begins to lose structural integrity at around 400 to 500 degrees Celsius. This means that a large, uncontrolled hydrocarbon fire on board a tanker will structurally compromise the vessel itself in a matter of hours, not days. The heat radiating from a large cargo fire is so intense that it prevents any close approach, by crew, by rescue vessels, or by firefighting tugs. The Sanchi case is a clear demonstration. Rescue vessels were present, but the heat radiation and the risk of explosion from the condensate vapors made close approach impossible for extended periods. Even when attempts were made, explosions disrupted operations. A second critical factor is vapor generation. Volatile hydrocarbons, especially condensates and refined products, continuously generate flammable vapors at their surface. These vapors, mixed with air, form explosive atmospheres around and above the vessel. Any spark, including those from firefighting equipment, can trigger secondary explosions. This is why the response to a large tanker fire is as much about preventing escalation as it is about active suppression. The pump room deserves specific attention because it is statistically one of the most dangerous spaces on a tanker. The pump room sits at the bottom of the cargo section of the vessel. It contains the large hydraulic pumps used to load and discharge cargo, along with the pipework connecting every cargo tank. Because cargo passes through this space, it is constantly exposed to hydrocarbon vapors, even when the pumping operation is not active. Pump rooms are required to have fixed gas detection systems that continuously monitor for hydrocarbon vapor concentration. They also have their own dedicated CO2 or foam suppression systems. Entry into a pump room requires a permit to work procedure, including atmosphere testing for both oxygen content and hydrocarbon concentration before anyone enters. Despite these precautions, pump room fires and asphyxiation incidents, from hydrocarbon vapor inhalation or from accidental CO2 release, remain a recurring cause of fatalities in the tanker industry. In the event of a fire that exceeds the ship's onboard firefighting capacity, the response shifts to external resources. Under maritime law and international conventions, the master of a vessel in distress has the right to request emergency assistance. Nearby vessels are obligated to respond. Coast Guard and maritime rescue authorities coordinate salvage and firefighting tugs. Specialized firefighting vessels carry high-capacity monitors capable of delivering foam and water at rates far exceeding what a ship's own systems can provide. Boundary cooling, applying water to the steel hull and superstructure surrounding the fire, is their primary initial function. It does not extinguish the fire, but it prevents the heat from spreading to adjacent fuel tanks and structural members, buying time for the fire to be controlled or the vessel to be brought to port. In the most severe cases, where the fire cannot be controlled and the vessel is at risk of explosion or sinking, the decision may be made to abandon ship entirely and allow the fire to burn itself out, or to attempt a controlled sinking in deep water to prevent a catastrophic surface explosion. So when you see a tanker at sea, you are looking at a vessel that has been designed around a fundamental truth. The cargo it carries is inherently dangerous, and the ocean around it provides no external help. Every piece of equipment on board, the inert gas system running silently in the background, the CO2 cylinders standing ready in their dedicated room, the foam monitors locked onto the cargo deck, the gas detectors sampling the air in the pump room, exists because at some point in history, that system was found to be necessary. The Sanchi burned for 8 days and took 32 lives, but it also accelerated improvements to emergency response protocols, to condensate cargo handling procedures, and to the design requirements for tankers carrying highly volatile cargoes. A tanker fire at sea is not a failure of a single system. It is a test of every system simultaneously, and the engineering that surrounds it is built on the precise understanding that when those systems are needed, there is nowhere else to go. I've already covered what happens in the first 60 seconds when a ship loses all power. a scenario that, as you now understand, is sometimes the direct result of an engine room fire. That video explains the emergency response sequence from the moment the lights go out. If you want to understand how those two events connect, that's where to look next.